It's a great honor for me to address you at the start of the academic year here at the renowned College of Europe, one of three reasons, at least. The founding fathers of the European Union established the College of Europe as an elite academic institution where future European leaders will be educated, fully aware that the project of the United Europe depends on the people. Second, you gave me an honor to speak on the 30th anniversary of the foundation of the Natolin campus, which has been recognized for its valuable contribution to the integration of Central and Eastern Europe into the Union. The third reason is the fact that the patron of this year's promotion is the great European and friend of North Macedonia and the Balkans, the late President of the European Parliament, Mr. David Sassoli. He was one of the outspoken advocates, friends and supporters for the integration of the Western Balkans into the European Union. The very fact that his first visit outside of the EU borders in the official capacity as a Speaker of the Assembly was in North Macedonia speaks volumes about his beliefs and dedication. And another symbolism. He arrived in Skopje just a few days before the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Apart from being a living witness, David Sassoli, with a hammer in his hands, himself participated in the demolition of the wall that divided our continent for decades. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that Mr. Sassoli considered all walls that separate people being immoral. Esteemed attendees, not all curtains are made of iron, and not all walls are made of concrete. Immoral walls of separation can be both political and perceptual. One of these walls was erected for years in front of my country, North Macedonia, and in front of my region, the Western Balkan. On the Macedonian Independence Day in 1991, we already achieved a national consensus on our European future. Regrettably, the long integration road was full of blockades and delays. One member state pressed for the change of country's name, and another for changing the reading of our national history. In order to succeed and to progress, we made difficult compromises on very sensitive issues, while preserving what is the most valuable to us, our identity. In the entire history of the organization, we are the only country that changed its name for the sake of stability and prosperity of the present and future generations of Macedonians. In the last 200 years, especially after the great Eastern crisis in the 19th century and the Balkan Wars in the 20th, the Balkans became closely associated with blood and instability, where hatred and clashes are the rule, and mutual respect and peace an exception. The only driving force that can still turn that exception into a rule is the European Union. The desire for membership in the Union is still the lowest common denominator of all the countries in the region. Nationwide social and political consensus are still hold around that issue. I say still because we don't know for how long. Dear friends, children born in 2005, when we became a candidate for membership, next year will reach their maturity. So far in their lives, they associate the EU only with the status quo in the waiting room of the Union. They got to know only promises from Brussels and demands that we need to make just one more compromise for the sake of our European dream. And many of them are convinced that the start of the negotiations was delayed due to the enlargement fatigue and requests by a member that has nothing in common with the European values they admire. The frozen European integrations in the past led to prolonged political crisis, deep polarization of the society, weak economic progress, and fragile institutions, citizens' distrust. So many young Macedonians, tired of waiting for the wall of blockades to disappear, have left the country without looking back. The fact that among the Macedonian citizens, for the first time since 1991, Euro pessimism is on the rise shouldn't come as a big surprise. According to the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, 85% of the young people in North Macedonia believe that the country needs a leader with a strong hand, a narrative clearly espousing authoritarian tendencies. Unfortunately, the regional outlook is very similar throughout the Western Balkans. I do believe that one of the reasons for the region to be at the bottom of the European agenda is the perception among some in Western Europe still perceiving the Western Balkans as the region of perpetuating crisis. Exactly that happened during the massive 2015 and 16 migrant waves from the east, when the Western Balkans was identified as a key corridor to be managed. To be honest, big unknown is whether the ongoing Russian aggression in Ukraine will change that perception for the better. However, despite the motives of others, the following fact speaks about our real intentions and motives. As far as the European foreign and security policy is concerned, North Macedonia has a 100% compliance with the Union, which has not been the case even with some of the member states. Or let's analyze another significant decision made recently. Was it for the war in Ukraine that the Union granted candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina? Dear students, on my part, I was always a big believer in investing in crisis prevention rather than in the crisis management or damage control. Ladies and gentlemen, by accepting the European negotiating framework, we have opened the door for organizing the Intergovernmental Conference in July this year in what was a truly historic moment for us. Due to the many obstacles we have to overcome along the way, the general perception among our citizens is that the whole process is predominantly about the good neighborly relations. However, this is only a component of the whole venture. European integrations, in my view, have a unique potential to be the catalyst for the profound transformation of all strata of our society. On this point, I would like to make it absolutely clear. Domestic politicians are fully entitled to perform the national reforms. Rule of law, independent judiciary, anti-corruption, and free press are certainly not the obligations of Brussels. For eventually failed national reconciliation, fight against corruption or political clientelism, only regional political elites are in charge and they should bear the responsibility. Nevertheless, this process has to be a two-way street in order to be effective. The European Union approach to the Western Balkan integration should be bold, not hesitant, timely rather than late, and comprehensive instead of partial. In the past years, we unfortunately experienced both sides of this European behavior. Now allow me briefly to comment on all of these 3 points I have made. First, in the crisis time, bold, visionary decisions are required more than ever. Despite emergency, crisis could be a moment of reflection as well. The years after the fall of the Berlin Wall were full of excitement because of the arrival of the freedom, but also filled with uncertainty due to the transformation ahead of Central and Eastern European societies, which in less than 2 decades should have achieved what Western Europe achieved for almost 2 centuries. The Polish model of transition under the leadership of Mazowiecki and Balcerowicz proved to be one of the most successful. Although painful in the short term, it was a long-term success. In that period of crisis, the European Union made a bold decision to expand to the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. At the same time, their integration drastically reduced the possibility of mutual blockades due to the bilateral disputes. Nowadays, it should be a good advice for the Union to replicate this approach to the Western Balkans as well. Second, because of the war in Ukraine, we are facing a serious economy and energy crisis. European solidarity towards the Western Balkans should not be delayed. The lessons learned during the pandemic with the late distribution of the vaccines should support the improving process during the winter season. The rationale behind the adopted new methodology 3 years ago was, and I suppose still is, to speed up the whole process and make it more efficient. For example, the latest entry into the EU, Croatia, completed the negotiations in 6 years. But Montenegro and Serbia has been negotiating for 10 and 9 years respectively. And as of today, they have completed no more than 1/10 of all chapters. Since we have recently opened negotiations, one thing is certain: if the process becomes just another Balkan never-ending story, the attractiveness of the EU will reach historic low. Third, comprehensive rather than partial integration is needed. The longer you are in the EU waiting room, the greater the temptation to look for alternatives to full membership. In this context, participation in the newly born European political community shouldn't be considered as compensation for membership, but only as a tool for facilitating greater European unity. Dear friends, ever since our independence, the Republic of North Macedonia has had good friends in the European Union. Among them, the Republic of Poland stands as one of the strongest and most persistent. As a sign of our deep gratitude for the support by the friendly Polish people, I have decorated the Polish president with the medal September the 8th, the highest honor of my country for foreign political leaders. Another witness to the fall of the Berlin Wall and a great friend of Poland, Professor Timothy Garton-Ash, deliberating on the role of Pope John Paul II during the fall of the Iron Curtain, said that without the Polish Pope, no solidarity revolution in Poland in 1980. Without solidarity, no dramatic change in Soviet policy towards Eastern Europe under Gorbachev. And without that change, no Velvet revolutions in 1989. The Pope John Paul II's vision, like David Sassoli's one, was a vision of European reunification. He spoke of the East and the West of Europe as the two lungs of the continent. I am deeply convinced that without North Macedonia and the Western Balkans, Europe cannot breathe with full lungs. I thank you for your attention.